Okay, we're going to go and get started. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Lindsay. I'm the gallery director here at the UCF Art Gallery. Thank you all so much for being here today. And of course, today was rescheduled a little bit due to our unfortunate weather last week. So thank you all so much for being here. So it is definitely out of the norm for us to have an artist talk in an empty-ish gallery. So thank you all. And so what we did is try to show like some digital reproductions. I hope all of you were able to be here when the full installation was on view, and then of course we left a few up as well. So we're very thankful to have Charles Clary here to give a talk today, and I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then he's going to give a presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for some questions. So Charles Clary was born in 1980 in Morristown, Tennessee. He received his BFA in painting with honors from Middle Tennessee State University and MFA in painting from Savannah College of Art and Design. He has shown in exhibitions, I cannot say this, in Paris, France. I'll just say that.
Okay.
In Paris, France, the Netherlands at the Coda Museum Paper Biennial in 2021, the Shanghai Paper Biennial in 2021, Art of Paper Fair in New York City, and many other international, national, and regional juried group and solo and museum exhibitions. Clary won top prize at the 2016 Art Fields competition in Lake City, South Carolina, and in 2019 he won both People's Choice Award for 2D work and the Merit Prize at Art Fields. And he recently sold 3 commission pieces to Google corporate offices and was named the HTC Distinguished Teacher Scholar at Coastal Carolina University in 2022, which is the highest award bestowed upon a faculty member by the university. Clary has been featured in numerous print and internet interviews, including Create Magazine, Candy Floss, This is Colossal, Wired Magazine, the US and UK, High Fructose, Beautiful Day, and Blue Canvas Magazine. He's also been featured in publications including 500 Paper Objects, Paperworks, Paper Art, Paper Craft 2, and Push Paper. He's exhibited regionally, nationally, and internationally in numerous solo and group shows, and represented by Paradigm Gallery Studio in Philadelphia and R02 Gallery in Dallas, Texas, and currently lives and works in Conway, South Carolina, where he's a professor of studio art and associate chair at the Coastal Carolina University. So please join me in welcoming Charles.
So thanks so much for having me. I've got a lot of images in my PowerPoint presentations. I can't thank Shannon enough for having me at the space, for installing a crazy exhibition. I normally come to install them myself, but I'm a new father, so it just did not coincide with said birth of child. So it's been a fantastic opportunity. I'm glad that I've been able to be here today to do an artist demo and this talk for you. I like to keep it very conversational for the most part when we do this. If you have any kind of questions as the presentation goes, or if you want to hold them to the very end, totally fine, okay? So Memento Morididdle, fragility of life. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Charles Clary, and there's my email as well. I'm very active on social media. I think it's really important for an artist, either early career, mid-career, late career, to be socially engaged as well. So I'm going to start off with some funk, right? I love growth, right? I'm a huge horror nerd. I like when things rot. I think they're more beautiful when they're rotten than they are when they're like pristine. And it's this kind of beautiful decay that I'm really kind of drawn to. When I was in undergrad, or when I was a very young child, I really wanted to be a microbiologist. And I was so just enthralled by like microcosms of petri dishes and disease and viruses. But then I saw movies like Andromeda Strain and Outbreak, and I was like, Shannon, nah, maybe I don't want to do this because these are like hemorrhagic fever and all this kind of crazy stuff. But I still kept that idea of that imagery kind of at the forefront of my mind. I've always been kind of a science nerd, and I love all that kind of stuff. So, you know, even when I was in early elementary into middle school, you know, I did a big science fair project to test the air quality of our local school systems and put petri dishes up into the air vents. And then went to one of the local colleges, East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee, and got to look at a lot of this stuff under an electron microscope. And the air quality, needless to say, was not good. in these places. But it was, again, really fascinated by the micro realm. Yeah. So again, fuzziness, all this kind of mold growth, all this fungi, all these kind of bacterias kind of growing together in one little petri dish was really just kind of fascinating for me. I always joke when I started teaching many moons ago, one of the admins made me a German chocolate cake for my birthday, and I had a piece of it and then completely forgot about it for a month, and it was in this kind of cake dish. And I was living with someone at the time, and I was like, oh, what's this thing? Like, I totally forgot about it. Opened it up, and the waft of funk was pretty prevalent, but like the thing itself was this beautiful kind of coral reef encrusted mold thing. But I didn't take any pictures because I had to quickly get rid of the evidence so nobody kind of like shamed me. But I always found these kind of fascinating. They look like archipelagos, they look like our island formation, they look like tree canopies, they look like computer-generated sound waves to some extent. And like seeing these things in a different wavelength, right, was really fascinating because I'm also a chromophile, right? Sounds like I should be in prison, but I love color, right? Color, the more garish, the better for me, yeah? And images like this, right? That's really gross, right? But like if you remove the context of what it is, it reminds you of like chocolate, it reminds you of like cake decorating, those type of things. But once you know what it is, you want to stay away from it, right? And I want to try to do that with my work, right? You look at it from afar and you're convinced it's one thing, and then you get up close and it's a completely different thing, yeah. So again, I got a lot of images of funky stuff, right? But again, on the electron microscope kind of side of things, you get to see it in a completely different way, right? This reminds me of the Skittles commercials that were back in the, a couple years ago when they touched things and everything turned to Skittles and fell to the floor, right? This is a strawberry seeding itself, right, which is pretty amazing, yeah. That's penicillin, right? That's a strawberry Pop-Tart, which is pretty crazy, right? But it looks a lot like hot springs. It looks like topographical maps. It looks like open pit mining. It looks like all these other things. So I started making these visual connections to these different kind of systems. I'm also a cartoon nerd. My minor in undergrad was illustration. I illustrated a lot of stuff. I love Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, Shel Silverstein, Maurice Sendak. I love all these kind of things because cartoons are really great at being able to talk about some really heady issues in a much kind of diluted way, right? And my work talks a lot about a lot of like heavy duty stuff. One of the most like tragic cartoons I think that's ever been created is Adventure Time, right? It's one of the saddest stories that you could ever imagine, but it's told through the guise of animation, right? And it makes it digestible, it makes it easy to talk about. Because if this was live action, oh my God, right? I mean, we'd need therapy after watching an episode of Adventure Time, right? For my peeps back in the 90s, right? Liquid television was a thing. That's where you had the Max, the big head, Eon Flux, which was an amazing cartoon. Talked about really adult-centered themes, which was pretty amazing. But the colors in these worlds are really fascinating, right? Anything can be any color. A tree can be purple, the sky can be pink, and anything is possible within these realms. Venture Brothers, again, an adult-ish themed cartoon that really kind of plays off the nostalgia and that kind of stuff. And the New Adventures of He-Man, which is pretty amazing, yeah. And when I started college, I was a music and art major, which is the dumbest thing to do because both of them take an immense amount of time and dedication, right? But I never let like the musical side of things like leave my head, right? So when I was in college, I was a percussionist. I played in high school, played through college, and I could only get so good at percussion because my wrists don't bend, right? It's just weird. That's as far as they go. I can't force it any more than that. So I could only get so good at music, right? But I could get infinitely better at art, right? But I love the wackadoo like terminology that was associated with musical kind of notation, right? So this is pretty much the periodic table of being a percussionist, right? So these are like the basics you need to learn to be able to put them all together to create kind of beautiful music, right? But really weird names like a Cheese Chain, Diddle Egg 5, Chattahoochee, a Shirley Murphy, right? And the title of those usually mimic the way the thing sounds, yeah? So here's some more kind of notations. And this has kind of crept into the titles of my work, right? Memento Morididdle, right? And I think about my work as movements or as different volumes, right? So it has this kind of connection to both the visual and the musical. And when I started making this work, it was all about music, right? And music as a virus, and we act as the contaminated individual that takes it to somebody else, and we share it with them, they get infected, they share it with someone else, and then it kind of grows, right? And then through life experiences, things like that, the work changed, or the concept of the work changed. So just some beautiful musical notations. So I'm also really interested in artists that deal with death, deal with kind of heavy subject matter. Peter Bruegel, talking about the Black Death and how horrific it was. Yeah. Keith Haring, probably one of my favorite artists from the 80s, talking about the AIDS epidemic and kind of simplifying form down into these really kind of graphic images. Yeah. Nan Golden, who just got arrested for a protest, which is amazing. This is Giles kissing Gaucho goodbye, I believe, or Gaucho kissing Giles goodbye. That's what it is. And it's a couple and documenting their experience with AIDS and what eventually happens through that horrible disease. Teresa Margulies, this is a really crazy piece. It's an installation in which you walk into this room that's full of mist, and the mist is actually created from the water that was used to wash a dead body, and then it's vaporized and put back into the space. So you're walking through this kind of experience. Yeah, she's amazing. Felix Gonzalez Torres, and these beautiful pieces that were done in the corner of gallery spaces of candy, and you can actually take away this candy as you go through the exhibition. And he lost his partner, I believe, to the AIDS as well, or complications due to AIDS. And generally the candy is as much candy as he weighed when he passed away. Yeah. Motoi Yamamoto, again, an amazing artist. Does all of his work as this kind of ephemeral work where it's all done in poured salt, and it has a very specific meaning in his culture. And this memorializes the passing of his sister to brain cancer, and then later, like not too long ago, his partner succumbed to the same thing. So this is a very meditative process. It's a very cathartic process. It really transforms a space. So I draw a lot of inspiration from these artists. Yeah, and this is a kind of a painful process, right? You're sitting on the floor, you're hunched over for hours on end, and these pieces at the end of the exhibition get swept up, and the salt gets returned to the body of water that's closest to it, almost like a Buddhist sand painting or a Navajo sand painting, something like that. And it's this kind of very kind of therapeutic and cathartic experience. Yeah. So art in the time of crisis, right? Again, I use cartoon imagery to dull the pain a little bit, right? Dramatized reenactment. So this was my mother, and in 2012, both my mother and my father were diagnosed with terminal cancers. So my mother's was small cell carcinoma of the lungs. My father's was mouth and esophageal cancer, and these are directly related to habitual smoking, right? I had a really troubled childhood. They divorced when I was in 5th grade. They were both alcoholics, chain smokers, dealt with their own kind of personal demons. So like parenting was on more of the back burner, right? Because they did what they could, but that's not what we needed, kind of thing, right? So it's taken a long time to kind of come to terms with you did what you could and what you were capable of, and trying to let go of some of the anger and things associated with that, right? But this is one of my first big exhibitions when I came out of grad school, and she was able to come and see it. And it was the one thing we kind of connected with, because she was an art major in college as well and had a terrible instructor that kind of like shifted her perspective more into education, right? So she was an early elementary school educator, taught speed reading to college kids, which was pretty amazing. Yeah. But this is what her cancer looks like under an electron microscope, right? It's beautiful in its interpretation, but devastating in its reality. Yeah. And here's another image of that as well. Yeah. And then this was my father. And we had a very complicated relationship, right? When they divorced when I was in 5th grade, he became homeless for a while and then got his life back on track and then fell back into kind of despair. He was a Vietnam vet who had a really rough experience with being in that war, if you know. So he never really kind of like recovered from that, right? So again, it took me a lot to kind of come to terms with that. But this was his cancer, right? And again, beautiful in its visual, but devastating in what really happens with it, right? So in 2013, February of 2013, I lost my mother, and then 2 weeks later, I lost my father, right? So it was a very traumatic time, and I stopped making artwork. Like, what was the point kind of thing, right? My life had completely turned upside down. I lost relationships with my sister and my brother, and it was just devastating, right? So it took a good 3 to 6 months to be able to come back to the arts, and the arts actually brought me back, right? It brought me back from the brink. So I knew that the first piece that I was going to make was going to be a tribute to my mother, right? I was the closest to her. We shared a lot of things in common. We had our strifes, we had our problems, but like it was going to be a memorialization to her and the person that she helped make me be, yeah? So this is the early work. They look like topographical maps. They look like archipelagos. There were 272 paper towers in this exhibition that was called Meticulous Excavations, right? And 272 is the number of days from diagnosis to passing of my mother, okay? So there were 7 18-inch by 18-inch panels that represented the months. There were 26 12 by 12s that represented the weeks, and all the other ones represented the days in between, okay? So some were these momentous occasions where we were like getting reports from the doctors. Some were just mundane days, right? Where you didn't think that she was sick or that she didn't go through anything. Each of these layers is 15 to 25 layers deep in this early work, right? Very kind of like, they almost kind of breathe off the wall. The colors were an interpretation of the radiation and the chemotherapy that she was going through and what that would actually do to the body. Here's another detail. This was 8 feet by 45 feet long. And I still have some of these left. They're a permanent installation in my home as a reminder. And then a lot of them were given away to family members or friends that were there through the hardest time. Yeah. But it was a really kind of like cathartic experience to go through this, right? It was like I was getting those days back when I was making the work. And then the install was the hardest, right? Because it was like I'm giving those days back. I'm giving them away again. It's almost like I'm losing her over again, yeah? So just another kind of image.
Did you hire all this paper? Like, you ordered all these colors?
I did. So like I'm the guy that goes into a scrapbook store and people look at me weird because like, you know, people go in and like grab a sheet or 2 sheets, you know, maybe 10 at most. And here I am with a stack that's this.
Is there like spacers in it?
There is, yeah. In this early work, it was polystyrene spacers. And then now it's kind of shifted into illustration board as spacers. Yep.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it.
So what made you think to like approach this in like a data visualization way? Are you like very analytical? Are you a Virgo? Like how did this happen?
I am a very sensitive Cancer.
Like, did you have a class? Because I teach like one of my projects. I usually like have them do data visualization. So I don't know if you got it from like a course.
So I started looking at like music through computer generated sound waves and how beautiful that was, and looking at like pyro boards and how you can see visual sound waves through flame, right? So when you pump in oxygen into these pyro boards, it makes the flames look like the nodes and antinodes of music. Yeah, yeah. So I like that kind of visualization. And then I started connecting that to like archipelagos and topographical maps and this kind of like ebb and flow of something off the wall, and I really wanted them to be somewhat interactive, like not touching it, right? But like having this experience with like movement through the space as well. Yeah. Yeah. They are layered hand-cut paper stuff, right? So from afar they look laser cut, and that's great because people are like, oh, that's great, that's cool. And then they get up on it and they're like, oh, okay, that's different. that's a whole nother layer of wackadoodle. So yeah, this one took the longest out of any piece that I've ever made. It took about 6 months from start to finish. Because again, 272 towers times 15 layers per tower, that's a lot, yeah. So here are some of the details, right? So they get pretty intricate, right? Especially for hand cut work, right? I mean, these are like millimeters thin, right? And they're meant to represent or mimic like sinew of muscles. They're meant to look like scars. They're meant to look like wounds to some extent, yeah. There's another detail.
Prior to paper, were you doing something else?
I was a painter, and I was doing these really weird kind of like West Coast graffiti, flat kind of Takashi Murakami-ish paintings, and I was mixing that with action painting. So as a percussionist, I stopped doing that, but like I still wanted it to have a voice within the work. So I was dipping hot rod drumsticks, which are dowel rods taped together, and it creates a different sound, into acrylic house paint, playing that onto plastic to music that I was listening to at the time, waiting for that to dry, peeling it up, using that as a stencil for these kind of weird amoebic shapes in my paintings, and then layering on other flat imagery on top of it. Yeah, so, and then I stopped doing that because the paintings were calling for something else, and I just had to find a way to kind of like listen to that voice. Yeah. Yep.
There's like out of all of these, there's so many colors. Like
Mhm.
how do you choose like which ones to pair like with each album together?
So that's like the not the hardest part, but that's like kind of the most fun, because I have a huge shelf in my studio, and all the paper is color coordinated, right, from like red down to earth tones. And it's fun just to pick paper and just kind of layer it on top of one another and just kind of see what interactions start to happen. Like I'm really big into color theory. I love teaching color theory, but I love these kind of awkward interactions between color and these kind of garish interactions between color as well. So that part probably takes the longest, is like figuring out what color schemes that I want to play with. Yeah. And there's another one. I love the shadows. Yeah. Yeah. Some are flat, some are three-dimensional. I call them 2.5D because it's not 2D, it's not 3D, it's somewhere in between. Yeah. Here's another one, phlemebic opulation. And all this work at the time was dimensions variable, right? So this was 8 feet by about 30 feet, thereabouts. And it's now currently living at the Music City Center in Nashville, Tennessee. They bought it as a permanent piece for their space, and it's different than this, right? Because it can conform to fit whatever space I need it to fit in, right? And that makes it a little easier as well, because I don't have to provide these like complex schematics for people. I'm just like, we'll figure out how to fit it in this space as we go, right? And that it lends itself to some exciting things, and that it is kind of transformative, and it is so organic in nature, yeah?
Can you digitally create the shapes, or do you just do it all by hand?
All by hand, all by hand, yep. Yep. So you can kind of see the scale of the work with the people in the space. Yeah. And this is older work. I don't show a ton of it anymore. It just gives you kind of an idea of where it started and where it went. Yeah. More details, because why not? And there it is in the Music City Center. So it's different, right? It's about 10 feet up and about 20 by 20, thereabouts, right? But it kind of fits and conforms to whatever space it needs to go into. And then this for me was my remission, right? This is my remission from grief, the loss, the trauma of that experience. It's more of this kind of like dense conglomeration. This is 3 feet by 4 feet or so. This piece resides now at the Google corporate offices in California. But it was like my coming to terms and coming of age almost to kind of break away from the trauma, stop living in the grief, and kind of transition more into this kind of hopefulness. Because when you lose people like that, you start to question your own mortality, right? You start to question your own existence, and like, it becomes real to some extent. Yeah.
I want to know why it's this design specifically, because from what I'm seeing, a lot of it is like the same kind of cutout.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those kind of molds and all this stuff that I'm seeing before from the previous slides.
Mm-hmm.
They're all like, there's a lot of variation, but why is it this specific?
So for this piece in particular, like I was doing tracing paper diagrams, so there was a lot of crossover between the shapes that I was using previous and the shapes that I was using in these newer pieces, right? And it was, I think at that point in time, because this is 15 years ago, or no, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, anyway, that many years ago, like I was very much into this kind of very kind of like formulaic approach to the work. And it was ways for me to kind of occupy space, right? And to fill up the space in general. They've become way more organic now. Go ahead. Yeah, for me, yeah. And it was very kind of intuitive for most part, right? So again, these shapes came from the drummings that I was doing on that plastic. And I was just kind of reusing that shape over and over and over again. Yeah. Yep. So I buy them in 100 count packs. And if I'm really moving, I can go through about 100 in a month or two. Usually. Yeah.
Yeah, how do your Vietnam experience, which is father secondary, how that experience informed your art?
It's a good question. So it for me it provided a better understanding of my relationship with my father, and he never talked about it. Right? We would watch like military films, and like he'd go somewhere really dark, and I was like, oh, okay. So that kind of creeps more into the newer work that we'll explore a little bit in a second. But it made me hate him less, right? If that makes sense. Because when he was in college, he was an early childhood development educator and got his master's in that. And being abandoned like that at such an early age, you don't necessarily see things from their side of things. And as an adult, as more of this Memento Morididdle kind of series kind of evolved, I started having a lot more compassion for him. But it hasn't creeped in as much because I didn't know him, right? I didn't have any experiences really with him through my childhood. It was only kind of tangentially kind of related to him. But it's made me a lot more empathetic to what he had to go through. Yeah.
Being a soldier myself, I understand, that a lot of civilians don't understand the issue of what a man that's been to war has, the traumatic and the misunderstanding, and how that person relates to other people, other than his own. Usually, with his own, is with himself.
Right.
So himself is always like, like being a cancer. A cancer is within self, and it's in the craft shell. And therefore, you have that issue, how to relate to the outside world. And that's what war does.
Yeah. And I think we connected because I suffer from PTSD in a different way, and he suffered from it in his way. And it's a way that I can understand it now. Whereas a child, it's like you feel with that kind of hate, that anger, and now it's not that anymore, which I'm very thankful for. I understand him in a much better way.
You see, trauma transfers.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of people understand that trauma by itself, it comes in. It's like genetic. And so you have to live it, but the other person, the receiver, doesn't seem to understand what's going on. So the reaction is usually anger and rejection.
Yeah, and it transferred pretty heavily. And luckily, like I'm one of the ones that was able to kind of cope with it, deal with it, get the help for it. Yeah. So I really started getting into kind of Danse Macabre, Memento Mori, which is remember you're going to die. So Memento Vivere, remember to live, right? And I had been stuck in that grief and trauma for so long, right, that I found ways to kind of circumvent it, right, and tried to find ways to actually live my life. And I started getting really kind of like comfortable with the image of death, of this kind of like great equalizer that we will all succumb to this at one time or another. And got into Danse Macabre, the imagery associated with it. You see a lot of my work has this kind of imagery associated with it. Got into like mourning jewelry and hair wreaths, right? This kind of whole process of memorializing someone and keeping them close to you after passing, right? And our detachment from death itself, right? Like we kind of shuffle it off to the side and try not to deal with it when we need to kind of embrace it, right? We just had a child, and my wife and I went to the lawyer to draw up a will, right? Which is a very uncomfortable kind of thing to talk about, but like embracing it, knowing it, dealing with it allows you to kind of move forward and live life a little bit, yeah. So here's some more examples of hair wreaths and morning jewelry. I think they're absolutely gorgeous and beautiful kind of objects, yeah. And even in today's kind of society, right, you can actually do cremains encased in resin. You can actually take cremains and put it into a pressure system that will make diamonds out of it because of the carbon. And then you could have that memento to kind of carry with you through life, yeah. So then it got me really thinking about my childhood, right, and how much memory I don't have, right? I don't recall a ton of stuff from my childhood. There's no photographic documentation of my childhood. It was so traumatic that my mind just kind of blocked it all out. And there's part of me that's kind of thankful for that, right? Because I don't want to live in it. You know, I don't want to like sit in it, right? I want to understand it and deal with it and move forward. But you know, the part of me is kind of lucky that I don't remember everything, yeah? But not having photographs is weird, right? My wife takes photographs all the time. We have hundreds of photographs of different kind of moments. And I don't have that, and I'm not used to that, yeah? So in the Southern home, there's a lot of homes that have this kind of salon style grouping of family portraits or get-togethers or like momentous occasions, and I don't have that, right? But the thing I did have with my mom was we went antiquing all the time, right? Appreciation of the old stuff, right? So I started going to antique stores and I noticed all these frames, right, just being abandoned, and there are these beautiful ornate things that had this kind of cherished memory in it, and now they don't, right? And now they've just been kind of tossed and thrown away. So I felt a connection to that abandonment, right? So I wanted to try to re-imbue them with life. I wanted to re-imbue them with something special, yeah? So this is one of the very first installations I did, and it was on a weird wall. It was a round, or like a curved wall, kind of hanging it up on the wall itself. But it was life-changing, right? It was like, now I've kind of found this work, right? I was looking at like Victorian sitting rooms of this kind of like conglomeration of all your achievements and all the kind of things that you've done in life. And for me, it was like encapsulating the traumas, right? Encapsulating the things that made me make decisions to better myself and be a better person later on, right? And I like to think about these things as beautiful scars, right? We remember the trauma, we remember the event, right? And we have a scar to remind us of that, but we can kind of push past it and make it through it, yeah? So here's another one. This is the one that won People's Choice at Art Fields in 2019. I don't remember, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I highly recommend, if you are an artist working, right, to submit to Art Fields, right? You get one piece, it's like 20 bucks submission, which is on the lower end of submission fees. And if you get in, it's usually, they won't tell you how many people apply, but it's 3,000 plus. And if you get in, you're like one of 300 artists or so. The whole town becomes an art gallery, right? If you get the top prize, that's $50,000. If you get People's Choice, that's $12,500, right? I mean, it's crazy. It's like middle of nowhere, South Carolina, but it's all for Southern artists, right? It's amazing, yeah? So it's in their permanent collection now, which is fantastic. But I was invited to do an exhibition after that competition at one of their main venues. And it was the first one where I'm like, I'm gonna take everything I have and see what happens, right? So it's a huge space. It's, you know, roughly this size, right? It's at the B Market, it's not the B Market, it's Jones Carter Gallery. And I was like, I'm just gonna fill this thing from floor to ceiling full of frames and just see what happens. And this is kind of what came of it. And I started engaging corners. I started like making it super dense. So they go from like 3 inches by 3 inches all the way up to 4 feet by 5 feet. Here's another kind of detail shot of that. And it's great because they have no plan. There's no schematic that goes with these. There's no like diagram. It's you hang one piece up and then migrate out from that one piece. So it's very organic and fun when I do an installation. Okay, cool, sorry. I gotta go through stuff, sorry. So, and then started playing around with Memento Mori, kind of imagery, skulls, anatomy, what kind of things happen with chemo and radiation, kind of dissecting the body into these kind of like sinewy kind of muscle structures. Here's some more. I started really getting into medical quackery as well, because it was one of those things. It was like, how do I save? How do I do this? How do I, like, what can I do to save my mother or my father? And there was nothing that I could do, but it was that desire to want to research and want to delve deeper into things. Here's another really big piece. This is probably one of the bigger frames that I've done. It's 4 feet by 5 feet. Started playing around with drywall, right? So some of these surfaces are drywall. They're pristinely built, put into the frame, beat to crap with a hammer, and then hand manipulated to create that wound, right? And then healing it with the paper sculpture, right? And that came from a moment in my childhood when we were really poor. I had a $20 bill, lost the $20 bill, had no idea where it was, and as an angry adolescent, I kicked a hole in the wall. And for a moment, I was like, oh, it's beautiful. And then I was like, oh no, my mom is going to lose her mind. Yeah.
Is this found wallpaper?
It is found wallpaper, new drywall. Yeah. So more detail shots, right? I really love this kind of jagged edge that starts to happen, right? You can control it only so much, right? Which is another really kind of compelling component of the work. Another install. And again, I find these frames, I get questions all the time, how do you find these frames? I'm just diligent about it. Anywhere I go to speak at a conference or an art exhibition, I'm looking up every antique store that's in the area, grabbing as much as I can, and then taking it home and just kind of seeing what happens. Yeah. Much to the chagrin of my wife. It's like, why do you have so much? This was at Coda Apeldoorn. This was in the Netherlands. This is part of the Paper Art Biennial. What was great about this exhibition is this is the first time that it was actually put on a painted wall, right? And the colors started interacting with the frames in a really interesting way. They thought my crates were absolute garbage, built me new crates, and shipped all the work back in the new crates. Didn't cost me anything, but they were like, you can't build a crate. And I was like, yeah, they were fine. They were fine. Again, playing around with the kind of medical imagery, the skulls, the medical anatomy. Yeah. Some more. Love floral paper. I love glitter. I love metallic paper. I love any of that kind of stuff. This is a really big, this is really great. It's about this big, but about yay big. And started playing around with incorporating the design of the wallpaper. So it looks like you've kind of peeled back the layer of the wallpaper to see what's underneath it. One of my favorite like short essays is The Yellow Wallpaper, which is pretty fantastic story if you've never read it. This was the maquette, essentially. This was at Gadsden Museum of Art in Alabama, and this is essentially what transferred here. It was the first time that I actually had somewhat of a schematic to kind of follow to recreate the illusion of the space. This was at the Torgler Art Center in Newport, Virginia, an 8-foot by 30-foot installation with some of my absolute favorite paper artists. Like, it was one of those moments where, like, you have arrived. Because it was like artists that I had been following for years, and we were all brought in together as this kind of paper art compendium, which is pretty amazing. This was at Kuhnstrom in New York City, a really kind of awkward space, but a really kind of fun space to play around in. And again, that red really just kind of pops, which is really nice. Yeah.
You just had like a super garage that you can
Yeah. We have a really big 1914 farmhouse that used to be a bed and breakfast. So one of the rooms acts as a storage room because there are 4 rooms upstairs. One of them is a dual space where we keep like decoration stuff and whatnot, and then the other half is just me and my art. And then I have my studio as well. This is the piece that's going to be at the Southern Art Prize. I was chosen as a South Carolina Fellow for this year's Southern Art Prize. So this is one of the this is the installation, and then there's 3 drywalls that go with it. Yeah. So drywall deconstructions, just so that we kind of keep going stuff. Again, I am not one to just like sit on my laurels. I am a guy that works nonstop, right? I carve out an hour or two a day working, right? So this was a piece that I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go crazy big with this drywall and just see what happens. Because normally they were like 2 feet by 2 feet or 2 feet by 3 feet, something like that. Large, but not like large, right? So this is a 4-panel piece. It's 7.5 feet by 15 feet long. 4 panels, there's about 20 some odd openings, and the biggest opening is probably yay big, right? So fairly large, right? And I called this the Memento Morididdle series, right? So again, it's just kind of coming to life, appreciating life, moving forward through my grief. So you can kind of see this. And luckily we have a wall upstairs in our house that could accommodate a photograph, because now you can still see the fire alarms. But from the back, yeah. So I build these pristine panels, beat them to crap with hammers in my hand and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a void in the back because there's a support structure, and then those come and be glued in from the back. Yep. I use an acid-free archival glue that fabric people use. It's called Fabri-Tac. It's a really strong hold. It dries clear. PVA glue is really good as well in archival. It's just a little too wet for my needs for the most part. But there's some scale for you. I'm 6 foot, so there you go. Here's another piece. Again, I love beautiful wallpaper. I love patterns. I love like crazy colors and those type of things. Here's a newer one. They're fun. They look like they've been taken from like a dilapidated space and then kind of re-imbued with that life, which is really nice. They're kind of a beast to make because they are so big and you have to have lots of rolls of wallpaper to get it all down. I used to use wallpaper paste, but it's not the best in the world, so now I use an acrylic gel medium to adhere the wallpaper to the drywall surface. Yeah. So and I'll just finish it up with this because I do a lot of things, right? I make a lot of work. And for me, I was really into nostalgia. I was really into pop culture, but my work never like related to that until I started thinking again about my childhood. And then on weekends when my parents would binge drink, they'd take us to a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or some video rental store. And we got to pick out the 5 movies that were going to entertain us or babysit us over the weekend. I became a huge horror nut and was like, I connected to the final girl because they were thrust into a situation that they had no control over and they had to find a way to survive. So I was like, yeah, I'm the final girl. So I started seeing these videos at thrift stores or antique shops sold for pennies on the dollar, and I started gathering up those things. I'm like, what can I do with these? So I started recreating mom and pop video stores, right? So each one of these VHS slipcases now has 15 layers of paper plus 14 layers of illustration board as spacers that equal the exact dimensions, how fortuitous, of a VHS, right? So I can glue them into the box themselves. So this installation had 220 VHS pieces. This is the one that won Art Fields in 2016, right? So this is the first kind of iteration of this. In the installation, there's a TV, like an old box TV, videos from the slipcases that you could actually put into the VCR and play during the experience, yeah. And here is another one, yeah, of course, yeah. So here's what they look like, right? So it is capturing the essence of the slipcase cover, right? Because that was what drew you in, and how do you keep that, right? So lots of horror, you know, lots of other things. These are recently shown at the Spring Break Art Fair in New York City, and they are traveling to Scope, Miami this year as well, which is pretty great. Again, I could show you like tons of work. It's just I make so much stuff, right?
Have you not made these since 2016?
No, I continually make them. Yeah, I keep making. It's just like I can't stop. Yeah. And the colors generally have something to do with the film, right? So the Lost Ark, these are the Nazi colors, right? This is the stone colors from Kali Ma. And then this is, you know, what they think that the Holy Grail looks like. It's kind of gold-ish kind of thing. We have the Jawa color scheme, the Yoda color scheme, and this, what you can't see in the photo is these are all metallic papers for R2-D2. Yeah. This was the set of VHS that Google bought for a permanent install at their home offices in California, which was pretty great. They chose 80 from an exhibition I had at my gallery in Paradigm, and then they wanted to choose 80 pieces that were more global. So we went through a whole process of them finding all these films, sending them my way, and then I had to look on eBay and other sources to source all the other 80 films, which was intense, but we got it done. Yeah. And then this was in the installation that came from. There were 1,000 in this exhibition. This was at my gallery in Paradigm. This was right in 2020, which was crazy. But we still had the exhibition, which was awesome. Yep.
Have you seen every single film you make?
Yes. I'm a cinephile. I love movies. And I love having that connection to the movies as well. I love that experience and kind of refining that connection to the movie itself and when I first watched it or why I love this film.
How long does it take to make a movie?
A VHS takes about 30 minutes. From start to finish, cutting and assembly, it takes about 30 minutes. Yep.
Are there some movies that you have to like rewatch and sort of like get a better understanding?
Yeah. Or look them back up and like, what's the iconic scene from that movie? Like, what colors can I pull from this that will make sense with the film? Yeah. So that's me. That's me in a nutshell. There's my email. There's my website. You can follow me on Instagram if you so choose. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Is that good?